All right, everyone. There was a concert going on up in Halifax, up in Nova Scotia in Canada. So, Canada got some issues already there without saying anything further. But there was a concert by a Colombian-born artist up there. And she, when she took the stage, she's like, "Oh, brown women need to move to the front of the room. Sort of the white people get to the back, I guess." And one amateur photographer who was there, I guess, more to take pictures of this venue than for the music necessarily itself. It's like, well, no, I'm not moving. I'm here. I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to move just because I happen to have less melanin in my skin, because that's dumb, which it is. And it was funny because if you read the Billboard write-up about this event, the excuse used is, oh, but those people who didn't like this on social media responded with like racial aggression and what ifs. Well, you don't have to make a what if. The event simply is what it is, and the request made, or command really, that was given out, since this person was apparently escorted out when refusing to move based on the color of their skin. The situation simply is what it is. There's no what if involved. People were asked to move around the venue based on the color of their skin. Now, let me make a what if here, because it does stick, it does matter here. If this were a white performer saying, hey, I want white people at the front of the venue for whatever concocted bullshit socially progressive sounding reason, and said, well, everyone else needs to move back a few rows, what do you think would happen? It would be obviously labeled as racist by the media. There would be no defense of it. You wouldn't see the venue people support it. There's no way they could. 99.999% of all social media posts about it at all would be negative, and it would probably be a front page news all around the Western world. No, horrible racist artist like, Screwdriver fan, next Heinrich Himmler, tells, people who are not white that they're lesser and that they need to go to the proverbial back of the bus. It's like a Rosa Parks situation. These people are being told to move back because they happen not to be, in the words of the actual artist, brown females. I guess the idea, and specifically that, and then the excuse that she's giving there is, oh, well, yeah, I know what it's like to be like a woman at these venues. And sometimes, a man will get in front of you, you can't see over them because, they might be half a foot taller or something. They might be sexually aggressive, and so we're, sort of restructuring things here to give the women a safe space. Safe space, my ass. There's no such fucking thing in this world as a safe space. There never has been, there never will be. Where's the safe space for people, I guess, who bought a ticket to this event while happening to be white? See, and here's the other problem that I've seen. And it's real. It's not a what if. It's not a cop-out. It's not, oh, well, evil racist Sticks doesn't want to discuss white privilege or something. No, I've already covered why that's not real. There is a weird situation here, a no-win, very hypocritical, stupid loser of a situation, something totally beyond every possible realm of logic, where if a person happens to be white, and they appreciate and want to partake in the cultural trappings of some other group of people, like Colombian music, apparently, or anything else. The statement made usually is, you are being culturally appropriating, unless you are in that position as a total submissive, basically. And you're saying, well, you start breaking down crying, oh, I'm so sorry that we're, evil oppressors, and here's, I'm an evil oppressor too, I wasn't alive when there was slavery or segregation somehow, though I'm responsible for these things too, so I'm sorry. If you do that, it's okay. But if you're simply trying to enjoy and partake in a culture, like you're like, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna take up belly dancing. That was a big thing a few years ago. Every Halloween, don't wear a Moana costume because you're culturally appropriating stuff. And also, by the way, don't wear an Elsa costume because it's too white, I guess, was the statement made this Halloween, which is like, it's peak moral bullshit. But if you don't partake in that culture, if you say, okay, well then, because whites have no culture, I'm just going to sit in the corner and be bland, and I'm going to be like a piece of silly putty for people to punch into whatever shape they want, because, culture be damned, I suppose, then you're racist because you're not partaking in those cultures. So what is a white person really supposed to do? Like myself. what exactly can I do to appease these people and be like, okay, well, I can interact with you in a normal manner? They were talking about, I can't remember where this was posted. I think this was the other day too. And it was some sort of, it was a verified like Twitter account. I think it was an academic account. It's like, oh, do white people really need like pamphlets to know how to talk about race to people who are not white? It's like the average white person explicitly will never talk about race at all. They don't want to bring up the specter of that conversation. They don't want to interact with people who aren't white because they're afraid of being called a Nazi. Don't you understand how that's generating a problem? You're sitting there at this concert literally segregating people according to sex and race. You don't see that as racist. You don't see it as sexist. You see it as protecting the brown women, in the words of this performer. No, you're not protecting them whatsoever. You're generating, when you split people apart, when you make light of their differences, give them great importance, you inevitably cause inequality in those situations. If you're just like, hey, whoever bought the seat is sitting in the seat, whoever's in that spot who happens to be there, they're just going to stand in the mosh pit wherever they happen to be. That's the situation in which people, they're just individuals. You're not paying attention to any sort of rank or any sort of splits between them according to their race or whatever. Like, it doesn't fucking matter what the race of the person is next to them or behind them or whatever. By the way, can you imagine? She's saying, well, I needed to do this because, you know, men, they can get, like, sexually aggressive around women that are, like, dancing around to Colombian music or something. It's really sensual, so, you know, they might suddenly, like, basically assault people. Can you imagine if the same sort of reasoning were used in any other situation? Like, oh, well, we've got to move the females out of here because the men can't be around them, so females need to move back. Well, what would be the difference? The effect ultimately is the same, except that it's a different group being disenfranchised and having to move. No real difference, ultimately. You can say, well, no, that would be sexist. Why? Why would that be sexist? And it wouldn't be sexist to suggest, hey, men are the problem. What about some rapacious female that decides to say, oh, well, look at all these men around me. Hey, I want to take you home, boy. Now, what's the difference? Could happen. Probably does. Unless you want to claim there's a significant biological difference in sort of the mating habits of male and female. Get into the toxic masculinity, toxic femininity sort of bullshit too. Now, let's make a video on the topic of getting rid of toxic femininity, how men are not being allowed to be men and go out in the woods and like bash boars over the head with a rock, and that's causing psychological issues for them. They can't run around with their wangs out pooping in the woods enough. So, you know, the workaday cubicle structure, we got to abolish that and have, you know, men's week where we've got a couple weeks out of the year or something. They just go out in the woods and be like, live like cavemen or something. Because they're like Neanderthals. I don't understand the arguments made by the left anymore. This is not the same left that I was part of 10 years ago. Today is the 10th anniversary of me being on YouTube. When I first arrived on YouTube, it was inarguable in my mind who the good guys were. The good guys were the leftists. Because the leftists were standing against war and for equality and treating people with dignity. Now they're the exact opposite. Now they're for disenfranchising people because they have a dick, or they have too little melanin, or they come from Europe, or they practice the wrong religion. Don't you understand what you sound like? You sound exactly like the evangelocons I started fighting when I first got here. Like, you know, around 2007 to 2010 or something, I was on the moral left, basically. Then there was a period between where the right was still fucked up, so, you know, I'm not siding with them, but the left started getting a little weird under Obama, basically, towards the middle of his first term, and I'm like, well, I'm not comfortable with this either. I had to go off and be like apolitical or libertarian sort of third party. But originally, if I wanted to fight for people to just be free and be who they are and, you know, proud of who they are and, you know, leave people alone, I could be a liberal, because that's basically what they were standing for. It was almost a classical liberal feel during the Iraq War days. That started to go away under Obama and it has morphed into a very, very abusive situation. So until the left, so-called, decides to get its head on straight, no, I'm not going to vote for any Democrats. I'm not going to support your causes. I'm not going to speak well of your causes. I'm going to oppose you. Deal with it. And you've caused a lot of people who were part of the left, the anti-war, especially left, of 10 years ago to become far right. Now, I'm not going to get dragged off into the far right, but at the same time, I'm not going to be on the left. I'm going to be anti-left, far more than I'd be anti-right. Like, the evangelocons have died off. They've been replaced by a bunch of shit posters. People who are saying, yeah, well, we don't want to invade other countries. We want, like, free speech and internet rights and stuff. These are the same things that the left was fighting for 10 years ago. When did you abandon every principle you had? I'd look at this concert or something like this, and I see the cognitive dissonance kicks in. And all of these so-called progressive individuals will not allow themselves to understand that this is a bigoted thing to do. Oh, yeah, men, whites, get to the back. We're letting the brown women up front. No, it's not racist or sexist because, you know, historically maligned group of people. Who cares? No, now you're maligning a group of people. You're saying, oh, well, the men, you know, they get rapey when they're around dancing women too much. So we got to segregate them according to their gender. Now, gender fucking stand how you sound? Apparently not. It's too bad that there are so many morons in the world. It's just it's a crying shame. It's like no wonder it's so screwed up. It's because of people like that. Now, these people could just as easily be moralists on the right. Like they would be evangelocons maybe 20 years ago. It'd be the same thing. They'd be a Pat Robertson. And they're a bunch of sellouts, and they're run by a bunch of sellouts too, a bunch of corporatists and a bunch of so-called charismatic figureheads that really they're just doing it for money and fame. Like Pat Robertson, I don't think he's particularly religious. A Bob Larson, I don't think he's particularly religious. A Ted Aggard. So the evangelocons, they were always led by people that were a bunch of fucking snake oil charlatans. The same is true of the far left of today. A lot of their leaders that pretend to be really, really out there socially, they're not even on the left. They don't care. It's like, I think Ann Coulter's about the same way. I don't consider Ann Coulter to be a conservative. I think she uses conservatives to make a hell of a lot of money while spewing out very stereotypical prepackaged stuff and pretending to be like the conservative Paris Hilton. That's all she does. It's an act. She's good at it. It's not a problem. It's very misleading and dishonest, perhaps, if I'm right about this. But I mean, she's talented at it. She certainly makes her mark. And Sarah Palin, probably the same thing. How do we know that Sarah Palin actually spends her days shooting moose and praising Jesus? Maybe not. Maybe there are other things that go on in her life. It's the same on the left. It's the same with a Sarsour or a Sarkeesian or any Dunham. All of these so-called social activists. Sharpton, certainly. Jesse Jackson, certainly. Jesse Jackson known more than anybody else. Sharpton a little bit. I think he's disappeared mostly off the radar at this point. But yeah, it happens all the time. And it's seeped out into music. And by the way, when music gets involved with the censorship debate, it's never going to be pro-censorship. Because even the most shitty commercial artists will never accept censorship. Because it would destroy their sales. It would also lead most of their fans to call them sellouts. So look forward to music bringing a backlash against, I think, the social justice warriors. You're going to see a wave of protest music against the leftist establishment. The neoliberals and neocons, which are the same thing. That's about all. Peace out.